Thank you all very much for taking the time out today to join us. My name is Simon Wright, and I'm going to be taking you through how to drive SharePoint adoption and success for SharePoint Analytics. We're going to focus our webinar today on a tool from SharePoint Vitals. First, let's just take a little look at Gigworks and the experience they have within the sector. So Gigworks has been a Gold Partner, Microsoft Gold Partner since 2001, so that's 17 years now. Won various awards for their work with SharePoint technology and also with working with third-party solutions that sit on top of Microsoft stack stuff such as Nintex, and they won various awards there as well. Really an organization, the boutique organization dealing with high-end clients, working on the full Microsoft stack, so that's Office 365, SharePoint. We're also cloud applications using Azure and business intelligence as well through Power BI and so on. A lot of experience around process automation, using tools from Nintex, Hawkeye for generating reports, document generation, but really all around driving value out of your existing investment into Microsoft stacks, basically. Now, like most SharePoint practices or most Microsoft practices, whilst we use the tools that are in the platform as best we can, there's always going to be gaps, and so third-party applications are an area that Gigworks has a strong focus on. You can see here we've got a number of different third-party applications that we use with our clients, from ShareGate for migration to DocuSign for digital signatures, and SharePoint Vitals for analytics and adoption. And you can see how these fit in across different functionality and functional areas within the business. So process automation, we've seen in text. Around analytics, we SharePoint Vitals and so on. And then also around governance and compliance, SharePoint Vitals plays a part there too. And then when we look at industry-specific solutions, something that Gigworks has a lot of experience in around specific sector solutions like AEC, you'll see that analytics and adoption and insights are really key to all of those solutions, regardless of what industry you're in. You need to understand how your organization is making use of systems and tools you put in place in the organization. So, whilst it'd be lovely for the Microsoft stack to give you absolutely everything you need within your organization, that's not the reality. And this is another reason why Gigworks uses an awful lot of third-party solutions to deliver value to customers that they're working with. So, and as we come on to SharePoint Vitals specifically, we'll start to understand that Microsoft hasn't always done the best job of offering a really good adoption and analytics solution within their SharePoint platform. I think if you look at SharePoint 2007, for example, there was an awful lot of analytics in there and people kind of liked it a lot. But then when you moved into 10 and 13 and then into Office 365, things got slowly less and less valuable. There's lots and lots of stuff within Office 365 where you can delve into what workloads are being used by people within your organization, how many people have installed Office and so on. But really to try and understand how your organization is using your intranet or extranet sites or so on, it's really quite challenging to do. So third-party applications quite often reduce the risk of trying to build solutions yourself. Oftentimes it's best to buy something off the shelf rather than trying to recreate the wheel internally. I had a really interesting discussion with a large global organization about 2-3 months ago who had spent an awful lot of time trying to pull data out of SQL databases for SharePoint and pulling analytics and putting it into a data warehouse and mashing it up, and actually at the end of it not being particularly happy with the outcome. And that's a common story, which is why third-party applications play a part in everyone's story, basically. Speed to market is another key thing, and as you see when we go through SharePoint Vitals demo and how you set it up, you can be up and running and recording analytics within 5 minutes, and that speed to insight is a really valuable thing. The other thing, of course, is that third-party applications and the vendors therein, they're the ones that will make sure their solution continues to work with the versions of SharePoint as that evolves, and of course that's another advantage of using third-party applications. It air gaps you away from staying up to date with what's going on with the Microsoft stack, giving you that level of assurance, basically. So, SharePoint adoption and success. It's something that every time we do a migration for a customer, you'll find that adoption and usage is something that's mentioned. It's a very important part. If you think about an organization investing heavily in moving and reworking an intranet from on-prem to Office 365, that can be expensive, and you want to know that the effort was worth doing. There are lots of factors to driving adoption within SharePoint. A lot of these I'm sure you're familiar with, those of you on the call now. The user experience and the interface. What does the home page give you? What are the killer apps? What are people always clicking on? What are the things that are most used? How do I get to my department sites? How do I find the content that I need quickly to do my job? How successful is search? And so on. Other things like the information architecture. SharePoint adoption and success is driven an awful lot by structuring out your SharePoint environment in a way that is manageable and governable, but also really easy for employees to navigate, basically, and find the content they're looking for. And so in all these things, without a tool like SharePoint Vitals, in many respects, you're going to be guessing as to what's going on within that environment. Here's a common use case for SharePoint Vitals with the customers that we see. People running on an on-prem SharePoint environment have an intranet, and they're looking to move to Office 365. And they have absolutely no idea how their intranet is being used. Maybe they've used Google Analytics to try and get some sort of idea about page clicks and so on. But really, that's not going to tell you an awful lot about the user-specific stuff and what documents people are accessing and so on. So in order for them to migrate from on-premise to Office 365 and to rework an intranet application, really they're going to need to have some insight into how it's currently being used. What are the things people are most searching for? Right? And why do the people keep searching for the same thing? Why are they not finding it? Why are we not putting that front and center on the internet for people to find quickly and easily? And so another common use case for SharePoint Vitals is installing Vitals on an existing intranet to gather some analytics ahead of planning for a migration, planning for a reorganization or relaunch of an intranet, and then moving an intranet to Office 365, and then measuring performance and adoption increase over time based on the baseline stats that you had from your on-prem intranet. A common story, although we'll come on to lots of other stories as well after we've had our demo. So in comes SharePoint Vitals, and I just want to talk you through some of the value that you can get from a tool like Vitals, and then we'll jump into a demo and you can see it running live yourself. So there's an awful lot of data points that are captured with Vitals, and you can slice and dice the data points and the reports in any way that you see fit, and they can tell you an awful lot of different stories. There's a really good example of a customer based out in the States who based in Texas and didn't really have anyone outside of Texas working for their organization, installed a trial of SharePoint Vitals, found a lot of logins from California, a bit suspicious, only to find that the IT admin had shared their credentials to a technology supplier out in California to do some work on their internet rather than creating dedicated credentials for them. And those kind of stories, and there are many others, is just one example of how you can improve governance in your Office 365 or SharePoint on-premise environment. But also user adoption and security and compliance. User adoption is a really key one because, like I said before, unless you know people are using the intranet that you've spent time and money and agonized over to get it right, unless you know if you've got it right, you're not going to know if your investment has been worthwhile. One thing that lots of organizations find very useful with Vitals is the ability to look back over time for statistics around how an intranet site has been, adoption has increased over time. SharePoint Vitals is very good at storing data from the very first time you connect it up to your environment and saving those stats for all time, which means you can do things like, well, how is our intranet adoption and usage this year compared to last year? All those kind of really useful statistics that IT admins will often get asked, but also internal communication staff as well. We've already touched on geographical SharePoint usage in that scenario from that custom company in Texas, but it's a really useful thing to understand, especially with a dispersed organization, where people are coming into your environment from. And similarly, using what browsers and what devices. It's quite hard to deliver a mobile device strategy within your organization without knowing what people are actually using and how they're using it. So the ability to see what devices people are browsing your SharePoint environment and connecting to your SharePoint environment with. Without that knowledge, you're not going to know, how to devise a mobile strategy, basically. Search terms is a really powerful thing too when you're refining the use of your intranet over time. This was something that was really prevalent in SharePoint 2007 and people loved it. You could see what people were searching for. You could start to puzzle as to why people keep searching for HR policies even though you have a massive link at the top of your homepage. And you can start to work through why that is and improve the user experience on your intranet over time. SharePoint Vitals brings that back, so you can now start to understand what search terms people are using, and even drilling into finding out what search terms are being used on specific sites or specific users or groups of users. So the granularity of and the fidelity of information that you can get becomes a really powerful tool in defining and improving your intranet. And then, of course, something that lots of senior management quite often want to see, emailed reports or internal comms. Let's see some emailed reports coming through of SharePoint usage over time. And so sending out scheduled reports to key stakeholders within the business can give you an awful lot of, well, it's just a really good user experience, basically. For anyone that owns sites, they can now get reports to find out what's going on within the environment. Okay, so enough talking. Let's have a look at the tool. So let me just bring it across. Here we go. So when you log into SharePoint Vitals, first thing you're going to see is the top 10 dashboard. Top 10 dashboard is a really easy ready reckoner just to see what's going on in your environment from a week-by-week basis. So at the top here, we've got some really nice little widgets here to tell us the number of users that have accessed the environment this week versus last week, down 4%. Number of sites that we have and that we're managing and reporting on, you can see it's up 7%, and then also the number of hits, and the hits are up dramatically actually, which is quite interesting. And then from there, we're into the top 10, right? These are the highlights. What are the top 10 visited sites? What are the top 10 active users? Fastest users and slowest users. Slowest users is an interesting one. Slowest users are more likely to adopt a technology less. And so if you want to make sure that people are adopting your Office 365 or SharePoint on-prem environment, then the first place to go and look is who are the slowest users and why. And oftentimes you'll find these people are from the same remote office location, maybe they use a VPN, and what this does is highlight you straight away that something needs to be done about that VPN because their connectivity is poor. And then finally down here we've got top 10 page hits. Now these are updating live all the time. You can slice and dice these reports in any way you want. You can see them in different graphs and so on. If for whatever reason you need to report to senior management or something on a regular basis, you can actually save these images and drop them into PowerPoints or whatever it is that you want to use. And as you'll see throughout the whole of SharePoint Vitals, you can also export things to an Excel file, and so that you can slice and dice and create your own graphs and whatever that you want to do offline, basically. Okay, so the top 10 is great, good, got a bit of insight, but now let's start to look at some of the other reports we can see. Next one down is the user profile report. This is a really powerful report for IT support, for example, make excellent use of the user profile report. What it is basically it gives you insight across a particular user or group of users as to what they're doing within your SharePoint environment. We've got one over here. I'm not going to show you who this is for because it's actually got real live data in it, but it'll tell you things like, you know, what documents they're accessing, what search terms they're looking for, what devices and browsers they're currently using. And here's a really good and common use case. Somebody phones up the IT help desk. I can't seem to get this thing to work in Office 365. You simply put in their username, select their activity today, and have a look at what browser they're using. And you see they're trying to use IE8 or some unsupported browser, and you say, well, you're using an unsupported browser, that's expected behavior. Could I suggest you use one of these browsers which supports that platform? So lots of really good use cases there around supporting users with Office 365 and on-prem SharePoint, things that are quite hard to get without simply just asking the user and hope they give you the right information. As we scroll down towards the bottom, and some of this I'll come on to in a minute, top paged hits and top visited sites and also videos, it means that you can start to see what sites are most popular for this person or group, but also what videos they're watching and for how long. We'll come on to that in a minute and how that can be used around health and safety and governance. Okay, now we get into some quite high-level reports. One of these we've already discussed briefly, that heat map about that company in Texas and how they were having content accessed from California. But also sitemap here, so you can show a hierarchy of your environment, and also schedule reports, so you can send those reports out to people on a schedule so that they don't have to bother you or ask you for current reports. So sitemap, I won't drill into this into too much detail. As I said, it's live. It's a live solution. But SharePoint Vitals can connect to any number of environments, Office 365 or on-premise or both. And you can start to click through and browse through your environments and see what people have been accessing within the hierarchy of Office 365 or SharePoint or both. Heat map, this is the one we discussed earlier. This is showing you where people are coming into your SharePoint environments in the world. And it's also going to give you an indication as to how busy they are as sites. So we can see London here is very busy, Netherlands and Germany quite active, a little bit of activity from Georgia, and the rest pretty low activity. But these pins you can click into and go into that specific location and see what sites and see what documents and various other things are being used, basically. And I suppose the easiest way of thinking about SharePoint Vitals is it's taking all of that brilliant information that you get from SharePoint and Office 365 and it's collating it and building it into a data cube so that you can then slice and dice information, drill into information to find, well, really to tell us any story that you want to tell, basically. And so in this scenario, drilling into a location is going to give you what documents and sites and things people are using. You can get that information in any other number of ways through the reports as you see fit, basically. Scheduled reports, as I said, will allow you to push reports out on a regular basis to key stakeholders. And then from there on in, we get into very much more specific reports, devices and browsers. Devices to me is very interesting because, as I said, it's kind of hard to define a mobile strategy unless you know if people are actually connecting to your environments and using it with a mobile device. Here you can see I have a report for devices. You can see I've set it to the last 2 months. You can see that I've got some filters on here. Last 3 months or all time. And you'll find this on most of the reports. You can see I've filtered on a device. I've just put in I because I want iPad, iPhone, and all those kind of things. But I could drill into a user or a group of users. So maybe I have a set of external users, and I want to see, what devices they're using to connect to our extranet environment, for example. Or I could even filter it just to a specific site, maybe just the intranet, because I spent a lot of money and time and effort making sure that it's mobile ready and responsive, perhaps. So with these kind of insights, you can see the number of activities and interactions that are going on with a mobile device. You can see across all the devices, and you start to get a really clear picture of what's going on within your organization. If I take that out and filter, it should bring up all. You can see the majority is desktop PC. I've got a number of pages there. Actually, what I might want to do is click on here and export the report. That goes on in the background, and it'll end up over here in the Exported Report tab when it's done. And then I can drill into that in any way that suits me, basically. Maybe pulling up a pie chart perhaps for devices and types of device that are being used. Similarly with browsers, we can do the same thing. And again, this is quite useful, especially if you're moving to Office 365 from on-premise. You've got to try and weed out those users that are using legacy browsers, old browsers or out-of-date browsers. Because you're going to find that adoption will be poor because they can't work with elements of Office 365 with old browsers. Now we get into a lot of detail. Things like search terms, which was a real classic with SharePoint 2007 and has been missing since. And then things like active users, visited sites, and page clicks. Lots of good stories about internal communication companies using the page click report to so they understand when they push out some new internal communications or news articles, how they're being interacted with in the business, who's clicking on them, who's going through, and how long are they staying on that page, basically. Video report is quite a powerful thing because lots of organizations are starting to make use of the video functionality in Office 365 for things like health and safety videos and onboarding videos. The ability to report on those by user or group is a really powerful thing. And what's even more powerful is being able to report how long a video was watched for example. So it's like watching a health and safety video for 11 seconds or 3% of the total runtime. And so this kind of insight can give those people responsible for things like health and safety and onboarding of new staff within an organization a lot of insight as to who is and isn't interacting with that information. Lastly, search terms. Again, search terms, especially if you scope it to an intranet homepage or your search center, that key search center, and see what people are looking for. If you see the same thing coming up time and time again, so for example, IT as a search term here has been used an awful lot of times, you've got to wonder why. And you've got to think to yourself, well, let's take a look at the homepage and let's understand why people are searching for some of this stuff. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe we need to make more of the IT landing page, or we need to make it more visible as to how people can interact with IT from the homepage of the intranet. So getting insights into search terms, but then also being able to filter in and see if people are searching for a specific thing, or different groups of users, or specific sites can get very powerful. Now, I'm not going to go into every other one of these reports, but it's going to tell you all sorts of things like active users and documents that people are interacting with per user and per site. One of the most popular documents in my environment is another really useful thing that organizations spend an awful lot of time trying to work out how to get those stats in Office 365. And the answer is, it's just not easy. So let's just jump back to our deck and let's just cover off a few customers and how they're currently using SharePoint Vitals, just to give you an idea of the breadth of usage for the tool. So Waterford City Council recently relaunched an intranet on SharePoint on-premise, but they had absolutely no insights as to how it was being used. SharePoint Vitals is now giving them those insights. Sodexo as an organization is a global organization with lots of different offices around the world. And they have a really strong internal communication process. And they've now built SharePoint Vitals into that analytics, or sort of the understanding the impact of their internal communications by using SharePoint Vitals to evaluate how people are interacting with those communications as they go live and for a period of weeks afterwards. Vernicare is interesting. Vernicare is an organization that has resellers, and so they create products that are used within the healthcare industry, and they have a reseller channel. Each of the resellers has their own portal, extranet portal, and they had absolutely no idea who was using those portals and how and why. They also didn't know where external accounts were going across the SharePoint environment, and so they use SharePoint Vitals to give them insights into all of those things. And then lastly, Kingston University. Kingston University it's a London-based university, and we'll go into a bit more detail now. But it's a university with 30,000 users on their SharePoint environment. And they use SharePoint heavily for the student portal, for the staff portal. One of the key things for them was understanding of student satisfaction, understandably, because it's a key performance indicator. And actually, at some point over time in the near future, it's going to be something that may be linked to what they can charge for their courses or even funding. So it's really important for them to understand how the student portal was being used, who was using it, which were the bits that people were interacting with, which were the pieces that people were not. Similarly, though, with the staff portal, and kind of similar to that Sodexo example, where the internal communications had absolutely no idea how staff were interacting with internal messaging, and now they do. And one key thing for them choosing SharePoint Vitals was that they always intended to move to Office 365, and they're now planning the migration. What's important to them is that they want to move the student staff portal to Office 365, but they may leave elements of stuff on-premise. So it was really important for them to be able to run in a hybrid environment, and to be able to report across people interacting with sites on-premise and in Office 365 seamlessly. And so for them, it was a strategic decision, not only to drive insights and get an understanding around student adoption and satisfaction, but also the future proofing of the tool. So as they move to the cloud, it can move with them.
Okay, I have a question here. Does this work with on-premise SharePoint as well as Office 365?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And you can install it in both, and it'll grow with you over time, so you can add other environments over time, which means you can report across everything, which is a really nice thing. Only caveat there is, if you want to see Simon Wright moving between these different environments, I want to be using the same account to access them. But if you've got, Azure AD federated with on-prem or however you're doing your authentication, that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, another question here. What is it like to install the solution?
Some of that depends on where you're installing. If you're installing it on-premise, it's a sandbox solution. There's a PowerShell script that does it for you. It takes about 5 minutes. In Office 365, it's even quicker. You connect it to the Office 365 audit logs and you're away. So, as part of this, the follow-up from this webinar, you can start a 30-day trial, and you could have that trial up and running in 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes in Office 365. And start seeing those kind of analytics straight away.
Okay, another question here. Am I able to get to this data with other analytics tools?
Yes, you can. So there is a RESTful API for SharePoint Vitals, which means that you could then get at that data with other tooling. Common use of that is getting at it with Power BI. So pulling that data into Power BI, creating your own reports, embedding that on pages in SharePoint, or Office 365, sorry, so that you can then give site owners visibility as to what's going on their site, is a good example. So yes, and that really gives you a whole load more flexibility to how you want to pull reports into your SharePoint or Office 365 environment.
Okay, another question here. How far back are we able to report on the data?
You can go, well, really from day one onwards. So let's say you started a trial today and you connected to Office 365, then we would start recording statistics from there. So really it's from day one onwards. So if you installed SharePoint Vitals 3 years ago, you can report over 3 years basically.
Okay.
But that's a real key advantage over Office 365, because Office 365 only really offers you insights, audit logs for a rolling 3 months. And actually only having 3 months view isn't enough for most organizations. SharePoint Vitals gives you that view of all time, basically, which is a really key thing. Otherwise you can't report over this quarter versus last quarter versus last year, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, it does look like that is the last of the questions. Simon, I do want to thank you again for the presentation, and I want to thank all the folks on the line that did join us today. We greatly appreciate you taking the time out, and hopefully you could join us again in the future.